And welcome back to coverage of Grand Prix Louisville. Marshall Sutcliffe in the booth with Jacob Van Lunen. On your left, Brad Nelson. On your right, Brandon Burks. These are the last two undefeated players here at the entire tournament. So Thoughtseize to kick things off for Brandon Burks. And he's going to see a couple of Desecration Demons, 3 Swamps, and an Underworld Connections. What is he going to take here, Jake?
Definitely taking that Underworld Connections. Super important card in this matchup. Desecration Demon, it's just a big doofy creature, and the Esper deck is quite good at dealing with big doofy creatures. Brad's really going to need the top of his deck to help him out if he wants to win this game. He's on the mulligan, and he's against an Esper control deck who led things off with Thoughtseize. Not where he wants to be.
All right, now Brad is on mono black Devotion here. Uses some really interesting cards. Finds a Hero's Downfall here. That could come in handy later, though. It's not going to do much in the early stages. Gray Merchant of Asphodel, one of the cards that Brad Nelson's been using throughout the course of the weekend to finish off his opponents and to bolster his own life total after playing cards that can do quite a bit of damage to himself, like Thoughtseize and Underworld Connections. He can actually put a pretty big dent in his own life total, but he can recoup a lot of that by playing Gray Merchant. All right, ooh, right on time. Underworld
that's the Brad Nelson we all know and love.
Yeah, now it looks like he wants to play around Negate here. Not Negate, there's no way that's main deck. What is he doing here? What just
it looks like he's playing around Syncopate.
Okay. He's going to give his he's going to give it a turn here. He has the land drop in his hand, so he can do that. This should be what, a Jace?
Yeah, that would make sense. And I mean, the fact that he drew the Hero's Downfall means that, you know, he can kind of expect his opponent to play the Jace.
Yeah.
And minus it right away. So
this has actually set him up quite nicely, though, right? He gets to Hero's Downfall, the Jace, untap, play Underworld Connections, no counterspell, and even get to activate it?
Correct.
That seems like a nice sequence here for Brad. Now, unfortunately for him, though, Jace does get a little value going here first, so he's going to...
A lot of value. That Jace draws
2 cards
Brandon
there.
2 cards there, and then it's also going to take a card out of Brad's hand.
That's
so,
right. Super divination.
Yeah, it's an Ancestral Recall right there, and that's never good when you're trying to win a game of Magic for your opponent to resolve a 3-for-1.
But Brad does, he says, look, I'm going to make sure I hit this Underworld Connections. He also could have used that window to resolve a Desecration Demon, one of the 2 that he has in his hand, but he knows that Underworld Connections is a much more important card going late into the game.
Yeah, I mean, that Underworld Connections, if his opponent doesn't just have a Detention Sphere right here on the spot, then it's going to represent at least 2 cards.
Right.
And if his opponent does have the Detention Sphere, then he's going to get another opportunity to untap and resolve a Desecration Demon, plus he's going to get to draw a card. So he's going to get a 2-for-1 to make up for that 3-for-1 that his opponent got. Remember, he is on the mulligan, so it's not the best situation, but he still has to be reasonably happy with resolving connections in that spot.
I love it. This is the grindiest, right?
Oh, it's the grindiest of the grind.
And I think that Brandon has passed the turn back, so things looking good for Brad. He finds another Hero's Downfall. His normal draw step is a Pack Rat. That's a pretty sweet draw, too, because he can use that and kind of force Brandon to have a Supreme Verdict at some point else, just losing to Pack Rat eventually. But he's going to fire off this Desecration Demon and just be like, hey, man, deal with this.
Once he gets the 7th land into play, then the Pack Rat can start making 2 rats a turn thanks to Underworld Connections. And that's a really powerful place to be.
That really does put the pressure on.
Yeah, it forces people to have a verdict.
Yeah.
And when you're playing things like Desecration Demon, you know, your opponent's going to... Yeah, there we go. That's great for Brad.
Brad is able to draw a verdict out of Brandon Burks' hand.
Yeah.
Maybe clearing the way for a Pack Rat later, but in the meantime, grind, keep drawing cards with Underworld Connections. He finds, was that a Mutavault?
There was a Mutavault. Great card in this matchup here.
Unfortunately, his other card is a Doomblade. Not a great card in this matchup. We mentioned it.
Well, the fact that he has Doomblade in conjunction with Hero's Downfall means that if his opponent does do something, like a turn 7 Aetherling with blue mana up, he's going to be able to deal with that Aetherling. And that's a huge deal when you're a mono-black deck.
It is. What I was going to say, though, is that Brandon has one creature in his whole deck. It is an Aetherling, so that play could definitely happen. But he literally, in his main deck, is just running the one of. So
Yeah, if you just have one Doomblade in your hand, it's pretty much useless. But if you have that Doomblade alongside 2 other removal spells, then it gives you a lot of resilience against one of the most powerful plays available to the Esper deck.
That's right. And one of the really the key finishers for Brandon. So here's another Desecration Demon. I really like how Brad Nelson's being assertive here. He's playing out these demons, and he just says, look, you're going to have to answer these. Like, he's not giving him a window to play like a Jace or something like that. Now you see 3 mana lined up there for Brandon Burks, and there's 4. All right, so Supreme Verdict. So Brandon's content with just trading off Supreme Verdicts for demons here, and you got to figure that that benefits Brad Nelson significantly.
Definitely. I mean, here Brad still not in the greatest spot here, even though he's drawing all these extra cards off his Underworld connections. That Thoughtseize is huge for him. He needs that Thoughtseize because that's going to be able to strip Sphinx's Revelation out of his opponent's hand, which is the card that's about to break serve in this game, if it's able to resolve. So if his opponent has Dissolve and Revelation, then he's in trouble. But if opponent just has, neither.
Doomblade, essentially a dead card here. I mean, sure, it can hit Mutavault, but only if Brad wants him to be able to hit it.
Exactly.
Devour Flesh and Azorius Charm are different. And Azorius Charm's what's going to hit the bin. He's going to halt all forward momentum here. And Brad looks to be firmly in the driver's seat with 2 Underworld connections and no pressure from the Esper control deck of Brandon Burks. Really in any form here. Was that another Thoughtseize?
It was another Thoughtseize.
He doesn't have the mana to cast it here. Oh, interesting. Was that a Merciless Eviction? That was a Merciless Eviction.
That's great for him.
Wow. How many of those is he running in the list?
So it looks like he has a single copy of Merciless Eviction in his main deck. And that's going to be great here because he gets to deal with both connections with 1 card. Definitely something that Brad is not too thrilled with.
That's a huge swing there. We saw this before. Brad set up so beautifully in another feature match, and still the next draw step was pretty brutal to him. But, and there's the first of what could potentially be a few Gray Merchants as well, which are really his kind of finisher. Brad, even though he hasn't taken any actual damage from Brandon, is all the way down to 12 thanks to the Thoughtseizes and the Underworld connections.
In a matchup like this one, you really don't mind just taking a ton of damage.
Now, Brad had the opportunity to run out his Pack Rat, but he knows that he doesn't want to do that because it's just going to get Devour Fleshed here potentially, and he wants to be able to run it out where he can play the Pack Rat and make a copy of the Pack Rat in the same turn.
Definitely.
Brad activates his other Underworld connections, and things still looking quite good for Brad. Brad plays Thoughtseize, and it looks like it's going to draw a Dissolve, but that was the only unknown card, I think, for Brad anyway.
Yeah.
So
I mean, he's got to be happy to get that Dissolve, too, because that means that he's going to get an opportunity to resolve Gray Merchant on the following turn.
Now, is he missing a land drop here?
Yeah, he's been missing a lot of land drops,
actually,
despite hitting all of these, despite having all of these extra draw steps. And he's a lot of cards in his hand that are reasonably dead at this point.
No attack there with the Mutavault. He wants to make sure that he conserves all of his lands possible since he has been missing drops.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm surprised he may have wanted to just get that Pack Rat out of his hand. And now with multiple Gray Merchants, he's definitely going to try to run one out. We may see him draw an extra card first, but...
All right, there's Pack Rat.
Okay.
So he's got a draw step or an extra draw step from his Underworld connections. He's got a Pack Rat activation, and he's all set to go here. Remember, he does also have that Mutavault sitting there, so if Devour Flesh is what Brandon Burks decides to run out there, Brad has the opportunity to activate his Mutavault. All right, so we have an activation of Underworld connections on the stack right now, and I saw Brandon say, hold on a sec. Brad's going for a land drop here.
Yeah, he wants to hit a land here. I mean, if he draws a removal spell from his opponent, like a Devour Flesh, then he can just make another Pack Rat.
Right. Remember, the interesting thing about Pack Rat is that Pack Rat makes copies of itself. It's not making just like, random rat tokens. It's making another Pack Rat, another Pack Rat.
Yeah, now this is nice for Brad, too, because he's going to get to get rid of a Devour Flesh or a Doomblade. And the Devour Flesh, actually, he's...
All right, so now the pack rat ability is on the stack, and Brandon says, hold on a second. I've got another play. Is this a far away? No, it's a hero's downfall on the original pack rat, which is fine. And then the Devour Flesh resolves, and that means that Brandon was able to deal with the pack rat. Though you got to figure, and there's a land drop that Brad was hoping to hit so that he could keep his Mutavault alive, but unfortunately Brandon saw through it and made sure to do all these plays with that ability from Underworld Connections on the stack. All right, so there's a Night Veil Spectre.
That's a great one in a matchup
Not too bad
like
for Brad here. He's going to kick things off with a draw step, though. Is he going to keep hitting land drops?
Looks like he is, and
Indeed
that's great for him.
So now it really feels like he's in the driver's seat here. It's going to take a card like Sphinx's Revelation or something, right, to get Brandon back in this game?
Yeah, a Sphinx's Revelation would be huge for Brandon, but even a Sphinx's Revelation at this point might not be enough for him. I mean, Brad...
He's way behind.
Yeah, Brad has a lot of action right now.
Brad's going to activate his Mutavault and attack. He hasn't played his land yet, so he's going to draw a Doomblade out, but he could tempt his opponent into using a card like Doomblade there, maybe a different removal spell, before playing his land, thinking, well, he's not going to hit his land drop for the turn, so I'll take care of that. Fortunately, it was a Doomblade anyway. That wouldn't be able to hit the Spectre, but if it was another Devour Flesh, Brad, small edges. Another land drop here. It looks like Brandon Burks has been drawing quite a few lands here, and Brad Nelson is just burying him with his Underworld Connections. There's a Nykthos now.
Yeah, and that's a pretty nice one, especially considering what's in his hand.
He's already got Devotion of 5 currently.
Ooh.
Wow, nice flip there.
Picks that Elspeth off the top of his opponent's deck.
For Brad Nelson, he gets to have access to an Elspeth down the line, but mainly it's better just because his opponent doesn't get to cast it. All right, so he activates Nykthos, and Dissolve is going to take down the Grey Merchant here.
And I think that leaves his opponent with no cards left in hand.
Got nothing left. Brad Nelson sitting on 6 cards in hand, passes a turn back, and looking to be in good shape. All right, Brandon Burks draws his card for the turn, ships a turn back.
Probably a Revelation at this point.
There's a Thoughtseize.
Yeah, so Brad definitely going to go ahead and use this Thoughtseize here.
Just might as well.
Yeah.
No downside.
I mean, you know your opponent kept it on top. There's no way that... It's definitely a Revelation.
What if it was another Elspeth? Would he keep that on top as well?
Yeah, but he would have cast it on his turn.
Right, so can't be that. It's got to be an instant.
Yep.
Yep. I see your logic, sir. All right, draw a card here from Brad. It's another land. Now, Brad doesn't really have any way to prevent this this whole Revelation situation from happening anyway, right? He plays a land off of his Night Veil Spectre. That leaves him with 1 in hand for next turn. He looks like he's thinking about scrying this card to the bottom. Yeah. Oh! Brad is carefully planning things out. He actually decided to keep it. Wow, he really looked like he was going to do that. All right, now here comes the Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize you, go down to 6. Oh, it's a Dissolve.
Interesting.
So he's going to use this Dissolve here because he knows he doesn't have any reach, and he'd rather just have the Scry 1 effect.
Yep.
Puts a card on the bottom. Here's a Grey Merchant. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
7.
6, 7.
So
Brandon Burks drops down to 9. Brad Nelson jumps right back up. And Brad looks to be in great position here.
It seems like Brandon's going to have a lot of trouble winning this game. I mean, unable to find that Sphinx Relation. Can't be happy with that.
Another land off the top here for Brad Nelson. He's going to attack for 4 damage. That's going to drop Brandon Burks down to
3, I believe.
To 3. And as the game winds down, you see players do this pretty often. Take a quick survey of ye old graveyard there, just to see, you know, like what is he working with here? What are we looking at as we move forward? Things are looking very good for Brad here. Oh, looks like he found a Sphinx's Revelation. This could change things potentially. Let's see what happens here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cards is going to bump him back up to 9 life and completely refill his hand after his draw step. What are we looking at here?
Oh, wow. So, I mean, this definitely changes things. I mean, at this point, Brad, you know, he still can't really lose to an Aetherling, but his opponent definitely just has tons of removal now. And, I mean, Brad will be able to grind him with an Underworld Connections, but it's no longer that easy game that it once was. I mean, his opponent might have just drawn into another Revelation also.
That's true. Now, we know that he's already used 2 Supreme Verdicts. I believe he has 3 in the main.
And he has a Merciless Eviction and 4 Supreme Verdicts.
He's got all 4. Okay, so he already used up the Merciless Eviction and 2 of the Verdicts. So he's got 2 more Verdicts that he can find here. But a Thoughtseize is going to kick things off, and it's going to show a couple of Heroes Downfalls, a couple of Devour Fleshes,
and a Doomblade. Yeah, so now...
Not a great hand for Brad Nelson. I mean, this is not really the type of spells that do work against Brandon's deck, the Esper Control.
Yeah, Brandon, though, he will lose 2 to that Thoughtseize, which is pretty relevant in a match like this.
Unless he has the Supreme Verdict all ready to go. No, he's going to start a Detention Sphere, though, which is going to do a lot of the work here. Oh, I think Brad's actually going to make himself sacrifice it with a Devour Flesh. He is.
Yep.
Target me, and he's going to sacrifice this Night Veil Spectre.
And then he's going to gain 3, which then he can translate into 3 more cards without Underworld Connections.
Yeah,
over the course of the next 3 turns.
He gets to keep his other Night Veil Spectre. And
yeah, it's definitely the most important part of that play.
All right.
No, it doesn't resolve. The ability gets countered because it resolves without a target.
And he just has to pass the turn back. All right, so this is going to be a close one here. Let's see what Brad finds. A Pack Rat, so he's got a nice backup plan. He's going to draw an extra card here off of Underworld Connections. Trigger on the stack here. Remember, Brandon Nelson just refilled his hand, so he's like, yeah, go for it. And Whip of Erebos as well. So things looking pretty good for Brad. Those are the type of cards that he wanted to draw that whole time, not those removal spells. But here's 4 damage. And what have we? A Hero's Downfall to take down the Night Veil Spectre. Take 2 damage. Drop you to 5. Post-combat Whip of Erebos.
Yeah, interesting, but
so no life gain there from that one.
He's going to
get back Grey Merchant.
And
that'll do it. All right, so Brad Nelson up a game here in what was really just a grindy matchup, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know, our first few sequences, Jake, were you explaining how many cards one gained from the Jace and then from the Underworld Connections and, you know, that kind of stuff. And it's very much a numbers game with this type of matchup.
Oh, definitely. And, I mean, in the end, those Underworld Connections just got completely out of hand. I mean, Brad was drawing 2 to 3 cards a turn from turn 4 until the end of time. The game went pretty late, so.
Yeah, and even though eventually Brandon found a way to deal with those Underworld Connections in the form of Merciless Eviction, a card I haven't really seen in Standard much, Jake. Is that a card that's getting much play these days?
It's a card that was definitely on our radar testing for the Pro Tour. When we thought that the green-white aggro deck was going to be a very big property at the Pro Tour, we actually had multiple Merciless Evictions in our sideboard, in our junk deck. But as we started to believe that other decks like Esper were going to be bigger and were going to be more popular, those cards found their way out of our deck.
I see.
It is a very strong card, though. The ability to exile all creatures is huge. It doesn't go into the graveyard. Yeah, it gets rid of gods. It can also just deal with a Super Friends situation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when your opponent has that triple Planeswalker Voltron assembled, they have that Elspeth they just tapped out for, they have that Jace Memory Adept in play alongside Ashiok. it's just
there are so
a
few
great
outs
card. Yeah.
to that situation, but Merciless Eviction.
Yeah, it's like you're playing against 4 different people. You know.
Yeah. All right, so players are sideboarding here. Looks like Brad. I mean, he's probably been playing against this Esper control deck nonstop all weekend.
Oh, I'm sure he's played a ton against the Esper control deck online also this week. I've run into Brad quite a few times on the internet. He's been grinding Magic Online as I have this last week, and he's had tremendous success with this deck.
Isn't Brad usually grinding Magic Online?
Yeah. It's rare for him to not be grinding Magic Online.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there have been a month or two at a time where he's only played like 3 matches a day, you know.
Yeah, he actually has found some balance with that. There was a time when he was playing all day every day.
Yes.
And it did put himself in a position to become one of the better players out on the Pro Tour, but it also took a toll. You know, he said, "Oh, a little balance isn't bad."
A little balance is good. You know, now he has a girlfriend. He works a lot.
Yeah.
He gets to make a bunch of videos and articles about Magic cards. Gets to share everything that he learns in all of his Magical Online adventures. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, that seems like a great place to be for Brad.
He does a lot for the community too. I think that one of the funnier things that I noticed at the Pro Tour when spending a lot of time with Brad was that an overwhelming number of players would come up to him and thank him for making the deck that they were able to win a PTQ with.
Mm-hmm.
And it was at least 30 different people over the course of the weekend. And you're looking at a Pro Tour where there are 400 players, and probably 10% of that Pro Tour got there playing a deck that Brad Nelson designed or gave to somebody. I'm one of them.
That Van Lunen math. 10%.
Well, 30 people came up and talked, at least 10 who didn't,
I need to see receipts. Signed, notarized documents.
I think the number might actually be 10%.
Is that right?
Yeah.
No, and I know what you're saying, though, for sure. But Brad, absolutely. And he doesn't have... He's not one of those players that keeps his decks, like, super secretive. I mean, if he's got something new, he'll keep it under wraps. But he's certainly willing to help out people with PTQ lists, with tweaking decks, with what he thinks is good for the metagame. And... yeah, I'm glad to hear that a lot of people were giving him thanks for that. All right, so let's head to game 2 here. Brandon Burks, playing Esper Control, fell to what was ultimately kind of a clunky draw from Brad, but it ended up being quite good when he drew that Underworld Connections, right? I mean, remember he had one in his opener, it got thought seized away, and his hand just kind of didn't do anything, and then right on time he drew one, was able to use Hero's Downfall on a Jace, and then follow up with an Underworld Connections and just sort of take over the game from there. Slowly, but surely.
Brad's got an interesting hand here. He has Pithing Needle, Desecration Demon, a pair of Grey Merchants, and 3 lands. Now, it's definitely a keep, but it's not really the keep you want. You really want a Thoughtseizer and Underworld Connections in your opening hand. I'm not sure how aggressively Brad feels that he needs to mulligan in these Esper matchups, especially when his opponent is on 6 cards.
Okay.
But it's not exactly where he wants to be.
Now, what is a Pithy Needle mainly for?
It's mainly for Jace, Architect of Thought. We might even see Brad preempt
the
Jace with the Needle. So
it's always nice, though, when you have a Thoughtseize, right? Because you can get a look at what you might want to needle. Oh, Jace right off the top there for Brandon. So if Brad does find a way to see his hand, he might pull the trigger on that. But for now, Brandon just passes the turn back. And there's an Erebos.
God of the Dead.
Yeah. That's a card that hasn't really seen much play, but you were talking about it later, and it was pretty good. Here's a Pithy Needle. If we can figure out what that thing's naming.
Yeah,
I like your read.
He's going to name Jace.
Of Jace, yeah. But we'll get that confirmed for you guys.
I'd be very surprised if he names something else.
Now, there are other things to name, though, in the deck that's worth noting, right? Namely,
definitely.
Elspeth and Aetherling?
Correct.
Okay. And right on time, Underworld Connections. He just confidently slams it on his swamp, and it resolves.
Wow. I mean, Brad is... Brad, another thing is... Yeah, so his opponent Mulligan has more than one copy of Jace Architect of Thought in hand, and Brad played a Pithing Needle.
The preemptive 2-for-1.
Yeah, the blind cabal therapy, as it were. You know,
Oh, man. All right, Desecration Demon. And, hey, if that Underworld Connection's resolved, well, this thing's got to resolve, so there it is. And unfortunately here, Brandon looks like he's falling behind pretty sharply, missing land drops, no dissolves in hand.
A bunch of dead cards here in hand for Brandon. And he's on the mulligan.
So how brave was it there for Brad to just run that Underworld Connections into the blue-white mana of Brandon?
I mean...
Calculated risk? Was it brazen? Like, what are we talking about here?
I think he likely knew what was going on. You know, he probably knew his opponent didn't have a counter spell.
How would he know that?
I mean, you have the ability to look at your opponent when you're playing Magic.
So you're saying he just had like a live read on Brandon?
I mean, reading people is a huge part of playing the game competitively. And I'm not saying it didn't happen. You know, I'm not sure what you want me to say, you know?
Well, I was just asking more about the risk reward. You know, like if it gets countered, how sad is Brad there? Is it a devastating blow to his game plan, or is it like, look, I got to get the counters out of his hand anyway?
I mean, I don't think it's a devastating blow. I mean, it's the Pithing Needle, when he names Jace and his opponent has 2 Jaces in hand, that's a pretty obvious time that you're going to get a read. And if your opponent like is clearly upset about that, then you're going to, know that they have multiple Jaces in hand, and they're on the mulligan on the play. You just want to run cards out there and 1-for-1 them, and force them to have the right iteration of cards they need to survive the early turns, rather than let the game drag on, where you might just get revelation out of the game.
Make him counter stuff if he has it.
Yeah, if he has it, it's fine. You just get it.
That's what I wanted to know. He does actually find a dissolve here for Nightveil Spectre, and the dissolve shows him another land, and he has a Thoughtseize, revealing Hero's Downfall, land, double Merchant here. So things are still pretty dire here for Brandon Burks, really. I mean, he's way behind.
Brad even gets to draw an extra card at the end of Brandon's turn with his Erebos, God of the Dead.
Jeez. And he draws a Nykthos.
Good card to draw here. That Nykthos going to produce 4 mana when it uses its ability.
Now, are these scry lands that we see from Brad, are they just for the scry effect?
I believe so, yes.
There's no pure blue cards. I know he's got Nightveil Spectre, but that's a black card in his deck. All right, here it is, Gray Merchant. That is going to activate Erebos, thanks to the Underworld Connections you see down there. And Erebos gets in there for a huge chunk of damage as well. So things looking very, very well here for Brad Nelson. And that's going to do it. Brad Nelson defeats Brandon Burks. And Brad is undefeated here, 11-0 now. You mentioned his impressive, I mean, really his dominating Grand Prix, his standard Grand Prix performances over the last 4 GPs, and he is still just killing it out here.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I know that I was perhaps being a little bit facetious when I said that he was the best standard player in the world earlier in the weekend, but I think numbers have to mean something. And if he's top 8'd 3 of the last 4 standard Grand Prix he's played in.
And played for top 8 in the last one.
Yeah, and lost playing for top 8 in 2 different matches.
Right.
In the only one where he missed. And here he is 11-0.
All right, so we've got game 3 of our other match here, which is John Stern. Yeah, we'll figure out who this is in a second. I've got about 6 deck lists on the table here.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
One of them says Todd Anderson, but I just saw him walk by. Yeah, we just saw him walk by, so I know it's not him. But we'll get we'll figure out who's actually battling here momentarily as we see Xenagos hit the bin. And we have a Demons versus Dragons fight here, it looks like. A couple more Planeswalkers in hand for player left. All right, and it looks like that they're done here. So, mystery player crushes the
Other mystery player.
I usually can recognize their hands